Donald Trump received the endorsement of a former presidential candidate this week, David Duke, also the former Grand Wizard of the KKK. So the question is, how will Trump respond to this very lofty praise from such an important and respected man as David Duke? Let's watch.
There's a story in the New Yorker magazine that talks about, long story, talks about your appeal and talks about the extent of their support for you among people who are members of white supremacist groups. At the same time, we've heard this week that David Duke has come out, former leader of the Grand Dragon, Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, come out and said he's supportive of your candidacy. So my first question is, why do people like that, like Donald Trump? And second, how do you feel about the David Duke quasi-endorsement?
I don't know the answer to the first. Who knows why? But I don't need his endorsement. I certainly wouldn't want his endorsement. I don't need anybody's endorsement.
Would you repudiate David Duke?
Sure, I would do that. If it made you feel better, I would certainly repudiate. I don't know anything about him.
But if you read this story and read a lot of people who are white, in organized white supremacist groups talking ebulliently about you, talking why they like you so much, would that trouble you at all? Does that give you pause? Make you wonder about your message?
Honestly, John, I'd have to read the story. A lot of people like me. You know, in the poll that just came out in New Hampshire, where I'm a very high number, 35%, the people like me across the board. Evangelicals like me, the Democrats like me, liberals like me, conservatives like me.
Absolutely.
Everybody likes me.
Absolutely. I hear that. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Except for maybe the other 65%.
Yeah,
who don't seem to like him
of Republicans.
Was he saying absolutely not? We couldn't hear the not part?
No, of course, there was, it was Mark Halperin.
Is he going to be a politicon?
Hispanics like him.
We'll ask him about that.
But, and this is, I'm going to make a Cenk point here, but, I mean, in that response was everything of why Donald Trump is succeeding. Everything. I mean,
totally agree.
That moment of, sure, if that would make you feel better, I'll repudiate.
Oh, it was such a great line.
It's such a great line. I mean, it's a line that I wish, like, regular politicians would say, because it does two things. First of all, it mocks. First of all, it's genuine, right? It feels honest. Like, yeah, I'll do it if that makes you feel better. I don't care, right? Mm-hmm. And then it also simultaneously mocks what we all know to be disingenuous, which is every politician who returns $1,000 because it was given to them because reporters raised a clamor, or they repudiate the endorsement, or they don't want the congratulations, or from some group. And we know it doesn't matter. And if a politician would be better off saying, no, I'm not going to return the $5,000, I can use it, but I hate that guy. Yeah. Right? I'm not going to do anything for him. Like, that's way more honest. And Trump's like, yeah, hey, little man, if that makes you feel better, I'll repudiate it.
And then the answer of, well, everyone likes me.
Yeah, everyone likes me, yeah.
I mean, it's both at the same time unbearable. Like, if you know a guy like that in your real life, like, hey, Bob, how you doing? Oh, I'm doing great because everyone loves me. Yeah. You'd be like, who's this Bob guy?
We saw those polls.
Maniac, right? But there's, at the same time, it's a great political answer, right? Like, I can't stop that guy from liking me. What are you asking me this annoying question about some guy from the Klan who likes me? I don't know that guy.
I think that there is a layer of sort of fun and games to it. But again, I mean, this is a guy that we keep seeing him attracting on the periphery of, the people who just like him not being PC or whatever, the people who want to beat illegal immigrants, the people who want to deport illegal immigrants, who shout out white power, who talk about wanting to set up a shooting gallery on the border. Like, those people are flocking to him. And when one of the best, most well-known white supremacists in recent American history, that he says he doesn't know who he is, which I don't know if that's true or not, says, I support you. I think that you've got a great plan, especially your immigration plan. I am one of the most xenophobic people in American history. I think you have a good immigration plan. He needs to repudiate that. Because he needs to say to his supporters that is not what my campaign is about. And he's saying, oh, yeah, I don't like it if you don't like it. It doesn't bother me on any level personally. It only if it bothers you.
Can I just
I think that's giving a wink and a nod to potentially violent racists.
Yes, but can I make a bigger point about Haman and interviewing him? And it looks like he's doing a good job. He's holding his feet to the fire.
He is, yeah.
But I don't understand why he's posing the questions as if he's also unsure why they're liking Donald Trump.
True.
He doesn't say, so you go out there and you spew a bunch of racist rhetoric, and then racists like you. Does that surprise you? That's how you should ask that question. Yes. Not like, hey, why do you think these people like? I can't figure it out. Have you figured it out? What do you think this is? It's not a puzzle, all right? And Bruce Bartlett blew the lid off this a long time ago. I just saw an interview that Bruce Bartlett did in 2012, and he said, the problem with the Republican Party is that there's a big swath of them, he said about 25%, who aren't big on democracy. In fact, you hear them say all the time that people on welfare shouldn't even be allowed to vote.
Yeah.
So that's how they really feel. And then they're also hardcore racists. What do you think that birther thing was? What do you think all the long-form birth certificate and Donald Trump was that? So people like him because they're freaking hardcore racist. So when he's getting 25, 30%, that's of the primary voters, that's who they are. They're freaking racist. So let's stop sitting around trying to figure out what his appeal is to people. His appeal is fascist in nature. It's people who like to demonize the other, and it's always the people with no money and no power and the immigrant. And that's what he's doing. They're misogynistic, they're nativist, they're over-militaristic, and they have scapegoating of the other. So it's classic fascism. No one will call it what it is because that's what it is, by the way. And it's got all the hallmarks, the 14 hallmarks of fascism. The Trump campaign has it. And Heilman sits there and acts like it's still a puzzle, like he doesn't understand it. He won't phrase it. Like I have a clip on this week's Jimmy Dore Show podcast, very popular, award-winning.
Everybody likes it. Everybody likes it.
There was, everybody, I can't help it. A lot of racists listen to it.
Liberals, David Duke.
Can't help it. A lot of Republicans. The point is, there was a reporter right after Ramos got kicked out of his press conference. She went on live with Chris Matthews, and she started to, first of all, she said, his bodyguard kicked him out, who's a very nice guy, by the way. That's how she said it.
Who said
that?
that?
Oh, really? Her name is Turd, T-U-R. I forget her first name. She's a reporter for MSNBC. And we all, I think, agree that Donald Trump is surrounded by fucking nice guys. I think we all agree that.
Especially the guys who are throwing reporters
people
out of the building.
Reporters. So she wasn't upset about it. But then she went on. She goes, Ramos has been trying to get an interview with him ever since his racist comments. I'm sorry, ever since the immigration comments. She almost accidentally said the truth, and she had to quickly correct it. The truth slipped out for a second on MSNBC, and she quickly corrected it because she knew that her boss was going to give her a hell of a time for saying that Donald Trump said racist stuff. And so that's what's wrong with that. And Bruce Bartlett told us this in 2012, and it's not a puzzle. And so that's what's wrong with guys like when they sit there and interview him that way. And he's not horrible, whatever. I just think they should do a much better job. And what Donald Trump is doing is revealing the inadequacies, the unbelievable inadequacies of the press.
As someone who's made his career in television, has ruined everything in journalism, right? Like when Murrow started out, they hadn't quite figured it out yet that they were celebrities, but then it just got wildly inauthentic, and they drive journalism now in many ways, certainly drive political journalism, because nobody reads. But yeah, you're right, but I don't know about whether they all went, I think more went to college than you think probably, but they did not care. They took pride in the fact that they were assholes.
Yes.
And for, the guy who used
to the people in power.
To the people in power. And, but to everyone. But I mean, and so they were misanthropic sometimes and probably hard to get along with, but fun to get along with, fun to go drinking with, fun to hang out with. And they were seeking the truth. And sure, sometimes obviously they wanted their byline at the top of the fold and they wanted to break the story. But they didn't care about pissing people off. They did not care about pissing people off.
Now the biggest offense is pissing people off.
Now that is. And isn't the old quote that journalism is printing something that someone doesn't want printed, everything else is public relations?